Since I started doing podcasting, when I started it, I can hear now these moments as the person who's like doing the interview, where you're like, shit, that person needs to clear their throat.
Yeah,
or they're like, blah, blah, blah. And then at some point they're like, blah, blah, blah.
No, but that doesn't help actually when you're trying to clear your throat. It doesn't help because it's just like kind of you're a bit like nervous, you know?
Yeah.
I definitely do need, but I will be one of the struggling persons. Hello, dear friends, and welcome to our podcast dedicated to sight reading through the lens of the historically informed performance practice. And today I have another special guest. And actually, you're returning the visit. Could you tell about yourself a little bit more?
Hello, Darina. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm Andrewburn. I'm a historical bassoonist and all around sort of, I did do podcasting. I still do podcasting, but we first had you on our show, Surviving Classical Music. Grace Newcomb and I had you on. I think it's still available in video format. You and Seb are in that episode. And that was what, a year ago or more?
I think more.
Could it even be 2 years ago?
Yeah.
Wow.
Something like that.
Wow. So, yeah, a lot of time has passed.
Yeah.
that show's over
time
now.
Flies. Yeah.
But, great to be here, and I'm happy to be part of this award-winning
Thanks
show.
for joining. So, could you tell about your channel, your podcast, and about your activity? So just a little bit more that people understand.
I guess you could say I have 3 tracks in my career, and one is centered around, of course, playing historical bassoons. And I mean, you can imagine what that sort of life is like if you're listening. The second track is I own and operate a bassoon reed-making business, which is very time-consuming. I sell to a lot of stores. I sell modern bassoon reeds to a lot of stores across the globe.
But you also have a YouTube channel about reed making.
That's right, yeah. So about anything to do with the bassoon, really. I find it... I think we all have this element when we start doing our own media production. We all have this sort of imposter syndrome, and I find it very easy to do reed making tutorials, since that's work that I do every day. That's really something that no one could argue that I'm not a professional reed maker or bassoonist. But sometimes, especially in the bassoon world, you know, I'm very niche in terms of what a professional bassoonist does. You know, I really only play on historical bassoons, but I come from a modern bassoon background, but I don't feel like necessarily like when I have advice to give that it's advice which will help a modern bassoonist play what's expected of them, and B, whether that advice, even though I may believe it's right, it might be contrary to what would get someone a job, I guess you could say.
That's not a bad thing when you're taking this niche and you exist there.
Yep.
Actually, that's a great thing for all of us.
Yeah. So I would just say that I do the reed making thing first, because I know no one could argue that all of that advice is useful to anyone and will help them be a better player or reed maker or whatever. But I wouldn't necessarily say that I only do reed making media, you know. And the third thing, just to round out that first question, is that I now do a lot of podcasting or videography and anything related to social media. I've been involved in that now starting almost 4 years ago. Surviving Classical Music started in September 2019, and it was supposed to be sort of a joke, me and Grace having a good time, and then things got really real for quite some time. And that became more about like living as a freelancer and the problems associated with like the workplace, rather than about music necessarily.
And even about activism, like musical activism in a way, because I was kind of going through your episodes this morning, and I noticed that there is a lot of really sensitive subjects that you were talking about. So how did you experience that maybe as an activism or maybe not? Did you feel about that in this regard? And what is your impression after you became successful, and how did it change you?
I think Well, the one thing I would say on that question is just it's hard to define what success is. And I think you never have an objective view of what you're doing until you stop, actually. And I was never really sure when we were doing it that we were making any difference at all, partly because when you make a podcast, you publish it and then it's just out there and you often get no feedback at all. And that I think was hard because we tackled, not every week for sure, but probably once every month or maybe once every 2 months, we tackled something that I felt was worth putting on the air, and in those episodes, we just got no feedback. And the difficulty, and one of the reasons why the show sort of wound down in the first place, is because we are all working musicians invested. We're relatively young in our career, early in our careers. We want to keep playing, and there's a lot of bad things that were happening, and to call that out could necessarily mean that someone might not get called for a gig. And I think there was always that line where no one was really willing to say explicitly, like, I know that this thing is going wrong right now. And so often the more interesting discussions would happen when we were like, okay, that's a wrap. And then we would talk for like 1, 2, 3 more hours, like at the cafe next door to the studio, about something which really should go on the air, but never did because it was too close to us.
Yeah, that's what I get an impression about when I think of our field, also classical music. It's really a sensitive topic. Have you seen this new movie with Kate Blanchett, Tar?
Tar, yeah, I just watched it.
What do you think about it?
I think that's a great example. I mean, obviously it's a fake, it's not a true story, like it's entirely made up, but it is so, I mean, I've never interacted with someone at that strata of classical music, somebody who has their own foundation, who conducts some famous group. I don't know those people. Those people are in a totally different area of music. We would never show up at the same festivals, like I'm just not in that level. But I can totally see how, there's a great example in that movie, and I hate to give a spoiler, but it's exactly the line which I'm talking about, is that moment where she's going to audition the cello position in the Berlin Phil, and she sees the boots in the bathroom of this woman who's obviously, we find out later, is going to audition, and she checks her out as the woman walks out of the bathroom, and you can tell she's like, oh, I wonder who that is, but she doesn't say that out loud. And then what happens is that in the blind audition, we see those same boots climbing up the stairs and about to play, and that's the person who wins the job. And it's completely subtle. There's explicitly, you could never say that is wrong. That there's a very obvious line there which is being crossed, because who knows? But in the end, she ends, and then later it sort of spins out that that's sort of like her. I hate to use the word boy toy because that's totally wrong, but you know what I mean? Like that ends up like the next person that she's sexually interested in. And there's this other story element to it where she's accused, and the accusations go on, but we don't see that on screen, so we can't really know. But that moment, like objectively, you could never know that she's preferring this person because she's sexually interested in them. But it's so easy as someone in the industry to go like, oh yeah, that I totally believe that exactly how they're presenting it is what's happening, and not that they're tricking the audience into thinking it's about sex, but it's really not. The way that they state it in the movie and how it winds out, while it's happening, as a musician, I'm going, yep, that's really happening.
Yeah, that's so cool that you pointed out this scene.
Yeah.
I almost forgot about it, but that's actually an important turn kind of the story. Yeah. So I was wondering, you said that all these really sensitive subjects on your show, they were not receiving the feedback or any kind of response. And which subjects were really triggering those feedback in a way?
I think, to be honest, the most feedback I got on a single episode was when I said we're stopping the show. And mainly because, and anybody who's listening here has probably heard the last episode of Surviving Classical Music. It's off the air now, so you can't find it. But basically, it was in November, just this past November, and like the scene, things were sort of going. I hesitate to use the term going back to normal, but people were having a concert schedule in around November or Christmas time, and someone had said to me, I'm worried about the future for my students. And we got in depth about a particular situation where I think her orchestra had less rehearsal time than normal. And then the whole orchestra was told in that moment, in the one rehearsal, tomorrow's concert is so important that you don't screw it up. And they said, I don't want my students to go through that. And I said, yeah, it's bad organizing if the administrator puts all the pressure on the first concert when there are multiple concerts. Why not invite the sponsors to the second or third or fourth concert, given that situation? And they said to me, no, I'm not talking about me. I can do anything. I'm like a machine. I can play under any situation. And I felt in that moment, first of all, they were being disingenuous. They were saying that something is bad, but that they could do anything. And if they can do anything, then it doesn't matter that the situation gets worse. Then just sight read your violin concerto or whatever for the first time in front of everyone in the Berlin Philharmonie. If you can do anything, then it doesn't matter. So that's sort of like coming from a place of dishonesty. And so at that moment, I realized, so we could really only be honest during the pandemic when none of us had work. But now the work comes back, and then the rat race starts again. We all have to be the best of the best. We all have to pretend like we're undefeatable.
Yeah. So for you, it felt a bit artificial to go on with the show after the pandemic officially.
Yeah, I think it was also harder because I think one of the difficulties on that, one of the downsides of running a show like that, where you're often talking about things which are a bit hard, the hard side, the darker side of working in music as a freelancer. One of the harder sides of running that show is that people sometimes just complain to you. Like, can you believe what happened to me this week? And you're like, that's not really worth my time.
Yeah.
You just want to vent. And I'm not going to put you on the show, basically. And that was one of the difficulties for me. Like, I think we did a show in the summer and with Johanna, and then we did that one in November. And in between there was just complaining, but not anything that was worth putting up. And also the scene every week, like every month, the scene was changing for 2 years. It was like, no one can sing. We can have only 5 people play, or no audience, but we can play, or only 80 people in the audience. Like it was just the rules were changing every so often, and so there was always a way to spin something. There was always an issue to talk about. Oh, what happens if this happens, and whatever. Then we got to a point where things really opened up, and I was hoping, well, if there is a real problem that could be fixed, why don't we present a solution? And I felt that with the episode we did in the summer, it was about, basically all of these concerts happened this summer. Like, so much music was being presented around Europe. And also at the same time, everybody was getting sick. And so there were these, everyone was getting phone calls that I know was like, can you come to Finland now?
Yes. Oh my God, this great time. Yeah.
And I had 15 calls for one weekend. Right. And it was one particular weekend. It was really, I don't know why, but all the bassoonists in Europe were sick. And I was being asked to play literally everywhere. Name that city, I was asked to go. But in probably 10 of those 15 calls, they never said how much they were offering. And it was just like, we need someone now. Do you accept? And I felt, I was already booked. But I felt that it would be really shitty of me, pardon the swearing, to say, how much are you offering?
Why? Why did you feel this pressure?
Because I think it's on them. Because they're basically, some cases, like a very well-known conductor wrote a very long personal email without any relevant information asking me to come. And if I turned around and said to them, like, first of all, you don't even know who I am, but thank you. It's very kind that you give me this attention. How much are you offering? And it turned out he wasn't offering very much. And if I said no, I know he would never contact me again. I mean, he still hasn't contacted me since, but I had this feeling like you are putting the onus on me to say, to just simply agree because your project is just more important than anyone else's.
But do you think it's just a sort of a manipulation that is going on here and there, like basically all the time, and just the pandemic situation kind of brought all these cases on the surface? But I think it's still like all these difficult questions about transparency and stuff, they are very much present, and they were present before.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So it's kind of, the problem. I mean, it's good that we're talking about that. Maybe people can reflect on this and maybe also protect themselves, like musicians.
Yeah.
But I think our scene is particularly difficult in that area and answering those questions, because exactly we get this, as my therapist says, like we get this glamorous image of music and everybody should be dedicated dedicated to music and dedicating their lives to music. And of course we're not talking about money because it's not cool. And I totally agree.
I just don't think many people realize that even at the high level freelancing scene, that for the people who are in it the longest, that those people are actually doing those concerts as a hobby. That most people who are on the freelance scene who are in their late 40s, they're actually making most of their income teaching or in a music related position, but the performing it's like a bonus to their income. It's not 100% of their income. There are obviously exceptions. I mean, obviously in France, it's a totally different system. It's different. But no one can live for 20 years or 30 years on 150 euros a day. It's just not possible. And especially now when we've just seen, like, Germany has 16% food inflation. It's not possible to live on the fees that are being offered. But the scene survives, and it survives also because a lot of those people aren't, like, they're not feeding their families off of those fees. They're teaching 1 or 2 days a week or something else,
working somewhere else.
Exactly. And so I think that's the part that people don't realize, how unsustainable it has become over time. That I think probably 20, 30 years ago, you didn't even have to teach. You didn't have to have anything else but the fees have been frozen for so long. And when I say frozen, I mean literally, like, people go on strike because they don't get a pay rise because they've had a 0% increase, and we've had basically a 0% increase for 15 to 20 years. And now this year we're all like, oh shit, because suddenly, the last 10 years basically there was no inflation. There was almost nothing. It was 1% or something. And now there's suddenly 10 or 15 or Switzerland, not so bad, but still,
Yeah.
So, sorry, we're turning this into my podcast.
No, but that's really interesting. Yeah. I mean, these are important questions. Depression. No. Yeah. So, Andrew, what did motivate you to do this podcast, actually? What was your true inner motivation?
I think Grace and I we have a really great time off the air. but on the air, everything turns into something like, I think I have a complex of, if I'm going to put something out there, I want it to be substantial and meaningful to someone, whether that's a reed making tutorial or me talking about a historical bassoon subject, or it's talking about work. And it began, if you listen to the very earliest episodes, which I guess you can't now, it's really Grace and I making jokes and like talking about how, we will go on a Saturday at like 5:30 to the grocery store and pick up whatever's 50% off, stuff like that. And what deals can we get this weekend? That was the sort of humor that we brought into it. And stopped being funny in April 2020, and that was hard, I think, for both of us, but it gave certainly me energy and a focus in a way. But yeah, I think we both wanted to do something which meant that we were putting things out there on a weekly basis. That was really it, because I think we all have this problem with social media. This was our first topic, our real problem topic, and still is for all of us, where you scroll and you're like, wow, I've got this one gig this month or one next month, and yet all I see are other people playing concerts. But if you meet them one-on-one, most people have the same situation that you're in.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, things are not going well for me. But you look on social media and you're like, that's just
very misleading.
This isn't true. But no, it's just everyone is having the one gig for them at that moment that you're looking.
Yeah.
And that is the hard thing. So I think that was the original serious topic for us, was to say, let's all get together and agree life isn't like we see it to be on social media. And that's still absolutely relevant today as it was then. And I think one of the things that I'm doing more now is I'm just doing a lot more stuff which goes on social media, but I don't think people realize actually how many hours go into whatever it is I upload. Obviously not photos, they don't really matter, but a lot of things you realize are staged.
Yeah, of course. That's an important aspect of today's social media behavior, let's say.
Exactly.
So today we're, sorry for changing so abruptly. Today we're sight reading sonata, a methodische sonata written by Telemann, and it's just the first movement of a G minor sonata. And you told me that you made your own version of that music, specifically for bassoon. And could you tell a bit more about this work that you have done?
Yeah, so this is a practice project, I guess. I have some people I have this sort of online studio that people sort of pay a little bit to be part of, and I might upload a fingering chart or something up there. All sorts of things appear there, which don't necessarily, they're not part of some greater plan, lesson plan, or something like that. And the sort of the assignments that I'm doing right now are related to this collection, in fact, where I've only published 2 of them so far, but I'm making a transcription for bassoon for one movement from each of these 6 sonatas, and each of those movements are a slower movement which Telemon has not only written like what I would call the composed line and the bass, but also the ornamented line. And the ornamented line will... The very interesting thing about this collection, the big takeaway for me, is that most of these movements, actually no, all of them in this collection, do not have repeats and end in a way which means that you can't repeat them. You cannot repeat them. And yet the ornamented line is so fundamentally breaking of the... I mean, it's not breaking. You see the melody sort of... The structure of the melody is still there, but there are just so many notes added, and he changes things. He changes the rhythm, and he's doing this because he's giving this to an amateur player, and he says this in the introduction. He's giving it to them as a gift, and you realize, wow, there's way more freedom out there, but we often only limit ourselves to doing ornaments in the repeated section of a movement, where of course there are repeats. But when there are none, we generally tend to let the composed line play itself. And that I find really interesting, where here is you have a guy who is absolutely a central figure of German Baroque, high Baroque music, and he's breaking the rules. And so you're going, okay, maybe our preconceptions are wrong. And so what I did in my project was I did everything. I sort of transcribed it for bassoon, and then I've also done my own ornamented lines as well, or I'm working on that myself. And everyone has the chance also to write their own in my little studio thing. So.
Yeah, please do so. So maybe we'll put a link to your online studio.
Why not?
Yes.
Why not?
Yeah, in the description of our episode. Thank you very much, Andrew, for coming, and thank you for this nice conversation. And thanks, Tim Shatney today is doing the technical wizardry. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
See you.